The grand lecture hall buzzed with energy. Students, professors, journalists, and curious onlookers packed the room, their whispers mingling into an anticipatory hum. The occasion? Dr. Felix Chambers, an academic titan renowned for dismantling political legacies with his razor-sharp rhetoric, was about to deliver a lecture titled "The Death of Leadership, a Case Study on the Trump Legacy." It was a headline-grabbing topic, one guaranteed to draw both fervent applause and searing critique. For Dr. Chambers, it was another day in the spotlight. For Barron Trump, seated inconspicuously in the middle of the crowd, it was a chance to confront a narrative that had plagued his family for years. Though his presence went unnoticed by most, Barron wasn't here to spectate. Beneath his composed exterior lay a young man ready to challenge the oversimplified stories and selective truths that had shaped public perception of his father, Donald Trump. When Dr. Felix Chambers strode onto the stage, his aura of confidence was palpable. He surveyed the crowd with an air of authority, adjusted his tailored suit, and leaned into the microphone. "History," he began, his voice commanding, "remembers leadership in two ways: as a beacon of progress or as a cautionary tale. Today, we dissect the latter, through the lens of one of the most controversial presidencies in modern history." The audience erupted into applause, some eager to cheer, others ready to listen. Felix basked in the moment, pacing the stage like a seasoned performer. His presentation began with carefully selected clips of Trump's speeches, followed by slides mocking key policies and their alleged failures. He ridiculed the handling of immigration, painted foreign diplomacy as reckless, and displayed Trump's infamous tweets as symbols of chaos and impulsiveness. Felix's wit was sharp, his analysis scathing, and the crowd hung on his every word. But in the sea of nodding heads, Barron Trump sat still, his gaze fixed on Felix. His expression betrayed nothing, but his mind raced with counterpoints, each sharper than the last. When Felix concluded the first segment of his lecture, he leaned into the microphone, his tone dripping with finality. "So I ask you," Felix said, addressing the audience, "what is the true cost of leadership built on division and misinformation, and how do we recover as a society from such damage?" Before the applause could swell, a hand shot up. Barron Trump stood, his tall frame casting a commanding presence. "Dr. Chambers," Barron began, his voice steady and clear, "while your analysis is comprehensive, it seems to miss some critical nuances. For instance, under my father's administration, we saw historic economic growth among minority groups. Doesn't that deserve acknowledgement in a balanced critique?" A hush fell over the room. Felix, visibly startled, recovered quickly. He gave Barron a thin, calculated smile. "Well, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice oozing condescension, "I'm flattered you chose to join us today. But surely you're not suggesting that isolated successes outweigh the broader societal harm caused by divisive policies?" "I'm suggesting that context matters," Barron replied calmly, "and that selective narratives serve agendas, not the truth." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement. Felix adjusted his stance, clearly sensing the unexpected challenge. "Very well," he said, his tone sharp. "Let's dive into specifics, shall we?" What followed was nothing short of an intellectual showdown. Felix brought up the administration's immigration policies, citing detention centers and the infamous border wall. Barron countered effortlessly. "The immigration system was flawed long before my father's administration. The emphasis on border security wasn't about exclusion but reform. His merit-based immigration proposal aimed to modernize the system and ensure fairness. Why is that left out of your analysis?" Felix's response wavered for a moment, but he pivoted to climate change, highlighting the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. "Would you call abandoning the planet's future a sign of leadership?" Felix challenged, his voice tinged with triumph. Barron nodded thoughtfully. Environmental stewardship is critical, but my father believed in fair terms for global agreements. It wasn't about denying climate change. It was about protecting American jobs while seeking practical solutions. Leadership isn't about blindly following. It's about balancing competing needs. The audience was riveted, their eyes darting between Felix's growing frustration and Barron's unflappable composure. Realizing the momentum was slipping, Felix switched tactics. He leaned into the microphone, his tone suddenly personal. "Let's set aside policies for a moment," he said, narrowing his gaze at Barron. "Let's talk about legacy. Your father's name has become synonymous with controversy and division. How does it feel to live in that shadow, Mr. Trump?" The crowd, gasped, the question cutting deeper than any policy critique. All eyes turned to Barron, waiting for his reaction. Barron paused, his face betraying no emotion. Then, with deliberate calm, he replied, "Legacy isn't about avoiding controversy. It's about impact. My father wasn't perfect, but he inspired millions to believe in the American dream again. That's the legacy I choose to carry forward." The audience erupted into applause. Felix's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. Just as the debate reached its peak, a voice from the back interrupted. A young woman stood, holding a folder in her hands. "Dr. Chambers," she said, her voice steady but accusatory, "how do you explain this?" The folder contained leaked emails, correspondence between Felix and political operatives, revealing that the lecture was orchestrated as part of a smear campaign against the Trump family. Gasps echoed across the room. Felix's face turned ashen as the woman read excerpts aloud. "So this wasn't academic analysis," she said, "but political sabotage." Felix stammered, "This is an outrageous violation of privacy." "Or is it transparency?" Barron interjected, his voice cutting through the tension. "The very thing you claim to champion." The room descended into chaos. Felix's credibility crumbled before their eyes, his carefully constructed facade shattered. With Felix retreating, Barron stepped forward. He addressed the audience directly, his voice steady and resolute. "I didn't come here to defend every decision my father made. I came here to challenge the oversimplified narratives that dominate our discourse. Leadership is complex, and history deserves nuance, not propaganda." The audience roared with applause, louder than anything Felix had received that evening. For the next hour, Barron fielded questions from students and skeptics alike. His responses were thoughtful, his demeanor respectful, and his arguments backed by data. Even those who arrived as critics found themselves admiring his poise. By morning, the events of that night had gone viral. Clips of Barron's articulate rebuttals and Felix's unraveling were shared across social media, garnering millions of views. Headlines hailed Barron Trump as a rising intellectual force, a voice capable of bridging divides in an increasingly polarized world. For Barron, the victory wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Reclaiming his family's legacy wasn't about rewriting the past, but shaping the future. As he left the lecture hall, a reporter approached him. "Mr. Trump, what's next for you?" Barron smiled. "Conversations like this. It's time to move past division and start rebuilding trust. That's the legacy I want to create." By morning, the events of that night had gone viral. Clips of Barron's articulate rebuttals and Felix's unraveling were shared across social media, garnering millions of views. Headlines hailed Barron Trump as a rising intellectual force, a voice capable of bridging divides in an increasingly polarized world. For Barron, the victory wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Reclaiming his family's legacy wasn't about rewriting the past, but shaping the future. As he left the lecture hall, a reporter approached him. Mr. Trump, what's next for you? Barron smiled. Conversations like this. It's time to move past division and start rebuilding trust. That's the legacy I want to create.